Going to be easy, and certainly not after last night's horrific events. The cause of the mayhem in central Istanbul is still not clear. Only a small group of Leeds supporters appears to have been involved. They were appalled by the police's failure to prevent the killings. The attackers were apparently not football fans at all. Whatever the truth, it ended in 2 deaths. One man, Christopher Loftus, died almost at once. Other Englishmen were seriously wounded and taken to hospital. 13 Turks are now under arrest, one of them charged with murder.
Well, it's not what you want to see surrounding a football match, is it? No, when you see a lad trying to identify his brother with a massive stab wound in his chest, it ain't the sort of thing you expect to see in a game of football.
The second dead man, Kevin Spate, was married and a father of 2. As a result of the night's bloodletting, Leeds fans were today penned inside their hotels, made to feel like caged animals. As they waited to be transported to the match, they told me they were sick of being treated like hooligans, as if they had committed murder.
All they're trying to do is turn the tables and make it out that it's English football hooligan problem again. The Turkish press have already said it, that all the problems are being caused by English hooligans.
You don't wear them for nothing.
You're going to wear these to the match tonight?
Yes, of course we are. It's a mark of respect. It's a mark of respect.
Do you think you're going to be safe in the ground?
No. We will be safe in some ways. Only way we're not safe from is what they're going to throw at us.
Their banner says "Hello Hell." That's the nickname of the intimidating Galatasaray stadium. But at their supporters' club, Galatasaray fans getting ready to watch the match distanced themselves from last night's killers.
I would like to give a message to all the British people that those people have got nothing to do with Galatasaray fans, and I'm really, really sorry. There is no excuse for it, I know, but I'm very, very sorry.
Very sad. Yeah, nobody wants like this fighting. Really, we are very bad at the moment.
The hope has to be that the killings have shocked everyone, Englishman and Turk, so much that there'll be no more violence once this game is over. Angus Roxburgh, BBC News, Istanbul.
Here, grieving fans gathered today at Leeds United's Elland Road ground, where they laid flowers and tributes and spoke of their shock at the 2 deaths. Those supporters returning home early described the hostile atmosphere in Istanbul.
Leeds supporters spur their heroes into football action. After a traumatic day of grief and mourning, the real purpose of the trip to Istanbul was underway. But the fans left at home had confused emotions.
Your thoughts aren't really turned towards the football, but at the end of the day, you're thinking maybe that if they can bring something off from the tide, that it might make things a little bit better in the long run. But obviously not for the families and people of friends of the people that have been involved in incidents in Istanbul.
For the vast majority of people, it's about having a good time and seeing a game of football, and then it just turns into this complete mess.
Across the city, another pub, the Bay Horse, was closed and silent. This was where Kevin Spate was the popular Leeds crazy landlord. The 40-year-old family man had travelled to Turkey with fellow supporter Chris Loftus. This evening, Kevin's cousin joined those who just had to see the growing display of tributes at the Elland Road Stadium.
Never had a bad word to say for anybody. He's just a really nice lad. I just feel such a great loss.
When the charter flight was cancelled, some fans spent all day trying to get to Istanbul.
It's just a shambles, isn't it, from start to finish?
But even before the kick-off, others were arriving home, some deported by the Turkish authorities, others choosing to leave, but incensed by their treatment.
They then put me in a cell, strip-searched me. I've lost a ring, a Gucci watch that were worth £500, and I've been sat with 2 illegal immigrants for 3 bloody hours. I think it's absolutely disgusting.
Tonight, the centrepiece of one collection of tributes, was a Leeds United football shirt covered in personal messages from all the closest friends of Chris Loftus. For many supporters, the grief has been heavy to bear. A community that shared the two men's devotion to their team had hundreds of messages of respect they needed to display. For some, the match played tonight in Istanbul had become an intrusion, the murders tarnishing forever the image of a game that's supposed to be so special. John Thorne, BBC News, Elland Road.
And we'll have the latest from Istanbul, along with a report on tonight's match between Leeds and Galatasaray later. But first, the rest of the day's news. Aid agencies in Ethiopia say they're racing against time to get more food to the drought-stricken country. The World Food Programme says existing stocks are now too low to feed the 5 million people it's already helping, while millions more are waiting for food. In Dessie, in the northeast of the country, memories persist of the last famine in 1984. From there, our correspondent Raghi Omar reports.
16 years on, hunger and the threat of famine are again haunting the northeastern highlands of Ethiopia. 3 to 4 times a week they congregate in their thousands in the village of Wichale in the Dessie region. They are farmers, but instead of being in their fields, they sit and wait at this center where food aid is stored. They await their turn to be called, clutching the sacks in which they will take the maize to their homes and their families. For over 1 million people in this part of Ethiopia, 60 to 70% of their food supplies comes in the form of aid. As yet, there are no extreme cases of malnutrition here. But the fact that so many farmers now depend on humanitarian supplies is a clear indication of how deeply the drought has affected the region. Shifaro Habara says he managed to live through the famine of the mid-80s by selling his cattle. But he says that this time, after 3 years of failed rains, he has no more animals left. But Ethiopia is a far more stable and democratic country now. Back in the mid-80s, the Mengistu dictatorship forced people off their land and tried to keep the famine hidden from the outside world. Aid workers have also learned crucial lessons, but there are still fears for the future.
I'm pessimistic. I'm pessimistic in these areas because we've seen a slow and gradual structural decline in people's living standards. This is not a one-off. We can see also in the way people are living, their nutritional status, we've seen that declining, and the future isn't good.
Everywhere you go in these beautiful highlands of Ethiopia, you can see the devastation caused by the drought. The land should be lush and green, but instead all you see is dryness. The fields are barren, and the withered remains of failed harvests are everywhere. But still, many farmers pray for change. They are staying on their land, in the desperate hope that they will not remain dependent on handouts. This season's harvest has already been lost because of the drought, but farmers are still trying to prepare their fields, hoping that the rains in June will come. But even if those rains do come, their fields will not produce any food until the end of this year. Raghi Omar, BBC News, Dessie, Ethiopia.
Sinn Féin has blamed the stalemate in the Northern Ireland peace process for a bomb which exploded at an army base in Londonderry. No one was hurt in the attack, which is thought to have been carried out by dissident Republicans. The army says there'll now be a review of security measures.
The damage was minor, but the intent sinister and murderous. The bombers used 5 pounds of homemade explosives placed just inside the perimeter wall at Ebrington Barracks, the largest army base in Derry. No one was injured. The Army's bomb disposal team extensively searched the area in the follow-up operation. Republican dissidents are being blamed. Unionists believe it's part of a pattern of attacks by such groups.
Which seems to be consistent with the efforts that dissident Republicans have been making recently to sustain a campaign. There was another bomb incident in an army barracks not far away from Londonderry. There have been other incidents as well. They are still at a fairly low level, but there is nevertheless a continuing threat.
The Irish Prime Minister said that the bomb was anti-Republican and an attack on peace.
The two governments are determined, and all of the pro-agreement parties and all the parties in this House, to make sure that acts like this do not stop our efforts. If anything, will just strengthen the efforts to try to find a resolution of the difficulties which we presently have.
There's growing unease about the security situation because of the dissident group's activities, the fear that there may eventually be an attack which will kill or injure. It was one such splinter group which carried out the Omagh bombing in 1998, in which 29 people died. Dennis Murray, BBC News.
The ousted Prime Minister of Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif, has been jailed for life for hijacking and terrorism. He was found guilty of attempting to prevent an aircraft landing in Pakistan which was carrying his army chief, General Pervez Musharraf. The general later led the coup which deposed Mr. Sharif. After the judgment, Mr. Sharif said there was no longer any justice in his country.
The prosecution had demanded death sentences for Nawaz Sharif and the 6 other defendants. Braced for a potential reaction, security around the court was at its tightest since the trial began. The scene as news emerged from inside the court that everyone except Nawaz Sharif had been acquitted, but that according to prosecutors, he will now spend 25 years in jail. The ousted Prime Minister when he believed he was at the height of his powers. He had a huge majority in Parliament. But sacking the army chief he's with here was his undoing. And preventing General Musharraf's plane landing was what put him on trial.
It's truly a sobering moment because it illustrates how easily power can be misused.
Officials of Nawaz Sharif's party said they may not be able to restrain people from protesting against the life sentence. But the few who tried outside the court were abruptly stopped by the security forces. Sharif's family spent an emotional few hours with him. After the verdict, they called it vindictive.
I am positive that this is personal vendetta against Nawaz Sharif. The military ruler has conspired against my father, and this is totally a false excuse to legitimize himself. That's it.
So 21 years, almost to the day since Pakistan's first elected Prime Minister was hanged, Nawaz Sharif has had a life sentence imposed on him by this court. Whether Pakistan's indifference towards him will now turn to sympathy is yet to be seen. Also, what effect this sentence will have on Pakistan's efforts to restore its battered image in the world. Mike Wooldridge, BBC News, Karachi.
Interest rates are to stay at 6%. The Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee has left the rate unchanged for a second month running. Manufacturers had said they were worried at the damage being done to industry by the strength of the pound. William Hague has launched the Conservatives' campaign for next month's local elections. He told party activists in Windsor that the Tories would raise school standards and cut council tax. Police in Uganda have issued international arrest warrants for 6 leaders of the Doomsday Cult thought to be responsible for the deaths of at least 1,000 followers. The 9 o'clock news has discovered that the head of the cult was diagnosed as a manic depressive with a potential for violence. And a former cult member has talked for the first time of his life with the sect and his escape. The cult, known as the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments, was based in the isolated village of Kanungu in the southwest of the country. The BBC's James Robbins has been to the region.
The schoolroom is empty. All the children are dead. Every one of them was strangled or burnt to death by the leaders of this Doomsday Cult. They were former Catholic priests in Uganda, expelled from the church, who gradually twisted and abused the Catholic faith to the point of mass murder. Outside, relatives still come to mourn. The smell of fire and death hangs here as they listen stunned to a man who tried to break into the burning church and rescue the victims. But it had been nailed shut, and now the awful remains have been bulldozed away. With the cult leaders either dead or on the run, we went in search of a priest who helped found the cult a decade ago, but later left in disgust. Father Paul Ikazire agreed to break his silence, describing his fellow priests and their false prophecies of the end of the world.
Oh, they were speaking about that the end of the world was about to come. First of all, they spoke about the end of the world in 1992. It didn't come. And when I left them, they were so angry. and they said that I would die.
The Catholic Church is a powerful force in southern Uganda. Local priests knew and worked with the cult leaders before they abandoned mainstream religion. The clergy runs most of the schools in this area and helps shape many young lives. The people in these villages, scattered across the fertile land, live simple lives, poor, reliant on farming and on small herds of cattle. But thousands of lives have been broken by civil war or by the massive AIDS epidemic. In Uganda, 1 in 10 people is infected. Now, more and more are looking for comfort in alternative religion. So why here? Why in this remote rural corner of Uganda? Certainly there's been more than enough violence here in recent decades to justify for some belief in doomsday as something better than life, a better life after death. Add to that a cult dominated by dissident Catholic clergy used to commanding respect, and suddenly the events of the past few weeks, however terrible, are not so hard to explain. And we found another clue to the cult disaster in Kampala, capital of Uganda. This is Butabika Psychiatric Hospital. The cult's founder, Joseph Chibawere, came here regularly, unknown to his followers or to the authorities who had licensed his cult. The man behind the massacres was diagnosed as a manic depressive, possibly dangerous. And to make matters worse, last year he simply abandoned his treatment. The senior psychiatrist here says he displayed classic symptoms of those suffering psychotic illness.
They either have received some message from somewhere, or they're very important, or they're very clever, or they have found a cure for something, and they'll stick to it, irrespective of the evidence that you may produce.
But a man with those sorts of delusions leading a cult could be extremely dangerous.
He could be very dangerous, in fact. And many of our patients who do have mania, that we see, will have been to a cult or will be in a cult.
If Joseph Chibawere is still alive and is caught, it's most likely he'll be put behind bars in the prison section of the hospital. But the authorities who failed to spot the danger signs before the killings of over 1,000 people admit they're now struggling in the manhunt and they need international help and support. James Robbins, BBC News, Uganda.
The first full-scale trials of cannabis for treating patients in chronic pain are underway in Britain. The controversial drug will be tested on 2,000 patients with a range of conditions from multiple sclerosis to spinal injuries. The drug will be sprayed from a dispenser into the mouth to try to relieve pain. If it works, it could be on the market in 3 years' time.
The way in which you'll be using the cannabis medicine is as a spray, which you'll spray under your tongue.
Alex Ure is among 2,000 patients taking part in the first ever full clinical trials of cannabis. Crippled by the pain of spinal injury, he hopes the controversial drug will work where modern medicine has failed.
Well, I hope it'll make me pain-free. For the rest of my life, pain-free. That's what I hope.
The doctor who'll run the trials from a hospital in Norfolk is confident they'll prove once and for all that cannabis is an effective medicine.
My hope is that we are going to find that medicinal cannabis does have a substantial place for treating a lot of intractable pain. I have a huge number of patients for whom modern medicine has absolutely nothing to offer in terms of treatment for their symptoms.
The cannabis plants are being grown under tight security at a secret location. A private firm, GW Pharmaceuticals, is blending different strains to produce a drug that relieves pain without getting you high. There could be a huge market for a cannabis medicine. Independent experts say if it works, it would be the biggest advance in pain relief for decades.
Up until now, we've had maybe 100 different trials conducted, but they've either been too small or they haven't had good objective and scientific endpoints. What we're seeing today, and we will see another trial starting in June or July, is the first large-scale trials which people will believe have scientific usefulness.
If this controversial trial succeeds, a cannabis medicine could be on the market within 3 years. It would treat a range of conditions from back pain to epilepsy, but among the first to benefit will be the 100,000 patients who suffer from multiple sclerosis. Many sufferers, like Claire Hodges, already grow their own cannabis at home illegally. She says it's the only way to relieve the debilitating symptoms of MS, and a legal version can't come too soon.
If a new drug is being developed, which is as good as cannabis, marvellous, I'd be delighted. It's a complete drag having to provide your own medicine. I'd be delighted if something comes up which is as good as cannabis. I look forward to that. But it's going to take a long time.
Scientists still don't know exactly how cannabis works, but as the evidence builds, one of the oldest drugs known to man seems set to become his newest medicine. James Westhead, BBC News in Leeds.
The opening races of the Grand National meeting at Aintree have been marred by the deaths of 4 horses. Animal welfare groups say more stringent safety rules are needed and that they'll step up their protests before the big race on Saturday.
This is the curtain-raising first day of the Grand National meeting at Aintree, the main event on Saturday. 2 horses died in the second race, and then in the Fox Hunters Chase for amateur riders over the national course, more tragedy as several horses crashed to the ground at the first fence. Rossall Island was one of 4 horses which fell. Badly injured, it had to be destroyed. Then, on what's been a sad opening day of the most famous race meeting in the world, another horse, Architect, the favourite in a later race, was one of 2 horses which fell at the last but one fence. It too had to be put down. There have been calls again tonight for new safety measures at Aintree, but at the course, talk was of a series of very regrettable accidents.
It's not for lack of having facilities here to cope with these sort of incidents, but accidents do happen. It's a risk sport, we have to accept that, and it's sad that they all have happened here today.
Horses have died at the last 2 Grand National meetings, and some animal rights groups say it's time for horse racing to be banned. Others say that's unrealistic.
National horse racing is a big event, it's a national pastime, and I think if we're going to make any sort of improvements at all, it's got to be through negotiation with the people who run it.
Today's tragic events have cast a long shadow over the start of the Grand National meeting. Adam Minot, BBC News.
Prince Charles and his 2 sons, William and Harry, are in the Swiss Alps on their annual skiing holiday. Despite the bad weather, the princes and their father posed for the cameras before taking a cable car to the slopes near the town of Klosters. Back now to tonight's football match in Istanbul between Leeds and Galatasaray, blighted by the murder last night of 2 Leeds fans. There's been a heavy police presence at the ground where the match has just finished, and Leeds have lost by 2-0. Neil Bennett reports.
Leeds took the pitch wearing black armbands in memory of their 2 fans who won't be returning from Turkey. The young Leeds players already faced an intimidating task. In the circumstances, they must have wished themselves anywhere except Istanbul. Poor concentration led to an early goal for Galatasaray. Leeds failed to block a cross, and their central defenders let Hakan Suka in between them for a free header. The despondency in the Leeds camp deepened just before half-time, when more careless defending allowed Capone to poach a second goal, with Leeds staring at the prospect of heavy defeat. Leeds started the second half in much more positive mood and should have pulled a goal back when Michael Bridges missed 2 good chances in quick succession. It was a brave effort by Leeds to secure the all-important away goal, but Kuehl was wide with another header, and a match marked by tragedy off the field ended in disappointment on it. Neil Bennett, BBC News.
And Paul Newman joins us now from the ground. Paul, has there been any trouble since the match has ended?
Well, Peter, as you can probably hear behind me, this is the fans from Galatasaray celebrating a victory after a tense day, and obviously some relief not just from the Galatasaray fans and indeed the Leeds fans, but the authorities getting through this match. There's been no sign of any trouble. What's underway now is the police operation to ensure that there is segregation among the fans. The Galatasaray fans, as you can hear, are leaving the stadium now. The 750 or so Leeds fans are still at their end of the ground. They'll be kept here, I understand, for about an hour or so after the match, and then they'll be taken to the airport to leave for flights back to the UK almost immediately.
And any initial thought, Paul, on the repercussions of these 24 hours that have stained the game?
Well, the big problem now, of course, is on 2 fronts. The question that the police want to know the answer to, and indeed the football authorities, is just who was to blame. At the moment, the police say their inquiries are at an initial stage, and UEFA, who of course have the power to impose penalties on the clubs if they feel either side's fans were particularly responsible, say they will wait for the outcome of that inquiry before they decide whether any action is appropriate. But I wouldn't expect it quickly.
Paul Newman in Istanbul, thank you. The next news is at 10 o'clock on BBC News 24, but from the 9 o'clock news, good night.
Good evening. The public is to be asked for its view on how 24 tonnes of nuclear fuel at Dounreay should be disposed of. The three options are storing it at the Caithness site, reprocessing it there, or sending it to Sellafield to be reprocessed. The announcement was made in Westminster and Holyrood.
The fuels come from the prototype fast reactor at Dounreay, which stopped producing electricity in 1994. The 24 tonnes is just a quarter of the total legacy of nuclear fuels still on the site. It contains plutonium and uranium, which the UK Atomic Energy Authority previously argued should be reprocessed for safety reasons and to make them available for commercial reuse. But the market's dwindled, and the authority's clearly coming round to on-site storage.
Ultimately, what will happen is we'll be storing this material on site, probably for a period of 100 years or more. During that time, we will keep it safe, and we will take account of developments worldwide to capitalise on that.
Anti-nuclear campaigners have wanted this route for years and think they can explain the change of heart.
They are now in the business of being a decommissioning centre. They're trying to develop real expertise in taking apart old nuclear plants satisfactorily, and that is where the future lies. Reprocessing is effectively dead throughout the world.
The Scottish Executive says given the high level of local interest in the future of Dounreay, it wants this public consultation. But the SNP, which also favours on-site storage, says the consultation's a sham because ultimately the power lies with Westminster.
The daughter of a Scottish woman jailed for drug trafficking in Venezuela fears her mother may not survive the ordeal. Glasgow grandmother Irene Campbell has begun a 7-year sentence after police found cocaine in her luggage. Her daughter, who's visited her mother in jail, claims she did not know the drugs were in the suitcase, which was being carried for a family friend.
She'd been asked to take these back home for some guy, and she stupidly done it. You know, she trusted him because he was a friend of my brother's. But basically, you know, she didn't think she would be so stupid to get involved in anything like that. She said she was told that if she pled guilty, she would get a much lesser sentence.
A 15-year-old girl walked free from the High Court in Glasgow, cleared of killing her mother's lover. 34-year-old Gordon Campbell died after the girl stabbed him in an effort to stop him attacking her mother following an argument at her North Lanarkshire home. He suffered wounds to the neck, chest and back. The girl, who was 14 at the time, claimed she was acting in defence of her mother. There are fears of further delays to the building of the Scottish Parliament because of the ill health of its Spanish architect. Enrique Morales was hospitalised after falling ill during a lecture tour of the United States. He'll be unable to resume work until a full recovery is made. But the Scottish executives say the building work can continue without him. That's it from us. Good night.
Good evening to you. Spring is struggling back.